I wonder who I still have coming in today. Let's see. Helen, daughter of the late Gerard de Narbonne. Oh, Helen! That chick's all right. Greetings, folks, and welcome to the series finale of Romeo on Shakespeare. I can't believe this is the very last episode. I appreciate all of you indulging me in this series, especially in that last episode. I don't know about you, but personally, I found that nasty encounter with Peter Frampton to be very distasteful and undignified. Imagine him getting upset because I used the song lyrics to show me the way when talking to blind Gloucester. I don't know how he's going to make it in show business if he can't take it. Anyway, I would have liked to have another go at him when I had the upper hand. Oh well, I guess it's too late for that now, though. Or is it? Do you know what you're talking about? Because I don't think you know what you're talking about. I can't believe you love Bertram. What a pear-shaped loser.
Pardon? I might tell him that I love him.
Are you confident in the I love you return?
50-50.
Because if you don't get that return, that's a pretty big matzo ball hanging out there.
Well, I just gotta say it once.
But Bertram? Boy, he's a real bounder, isn't he?
Yes, he's one of those bounders.
But it's worse than that, Helen. He's a male bimbo. He's a mimbo.
All right, I know he's a mimbo, but he's my mimbo. And nobody beats him. Let me ask you, what would you do if he was here right now? Run away like a mouse?
No, more like the Three Stooges at the end of every movie.
Who are these stooges you speak of?
They're a comedy team.
Tell me about them. Everything.
Well, they're three kind of funny-looking guys, and they hit each other a lot.
You will show me these stooges?
I will show you the Stooges.
When?
Well, I don't know where the Stooges are right now, but if I locate them, you'll be the first to know. In the meantime, let me get my notes and we can get started on your coaching session. As I've already said, Helen, my heart really goes out to you. Sometimes I think you're living in a fantasy world. You'll look at me like I'm the one who's crazy, but I fear that your love for Bertram may be unrealistic. I know in your mind you're saying, he's my husband and sooner or later he will know our love was meant to be. As requested, I looked over the letter you want to send him in which you say, I know that eventually the arms I long for will open wide and you'll be proud to have me walking right by your side. I don't know how you can do this to yourself when you know and I know that he's the kind of boy who only wants to run around Italy enticing virgins. But I think you make it worse on yourself when you write, I'll keep waiting and someday, darling, you'll come to me when you want to settle down. Oh, my dear girl, I hate to see you throwing away your life on someone who is a complete tool. But as we agreed, we'll meet once more and then hopefully you'll see if he'll finally want the love he threw away before. Look, you've heard what I have to say. I don't know what the future holds for you and that good-for-nothing loser. But if you want to believe he's worthy of you and that he'll come back to you, then you go right on telling him in your mind, Bertram, one fine day, you're going to want me for your girl.
Oi, mate. It's Peter Frampton. Let me in.
I'll be right there.
I got your note, but I could hardly make it out. I gather you're going through some type of 12-step program, and you're up to step 9. You have to apologize to everyone you ever wronged. It says to come here, and I'll get mine, so I'm here for my apology.
Let me see that. That's not what this says at all. It says, come to my studio where I take my program for episode 39 and you'll get yours.
Well, I'm here, so where's my apology? Who's that?
Oh, just some friends of mine to make sure that you get yours.
Hello. 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 Hello.
This is the punk I told you about who starred in that awful Sergeant Pepper movie in the 70s. Get 'em, boys!
Lightning.
Oh! Oh, wow.
Oh, wise guy.
Oh! No, no, no. Oh. Oh!
You hit me in the chin. What'd he say?
I think you knocked him out.
Hey, wake up and go to sleep.
All right, all of you scram. Well, that's it for me. You've been great.
You mean you're just gonna leave?
You bet. This is my last episode, and I am going out on a high note.
Achoo!
You're so good looking. Yuck, yuck, yuck. In Jane Austen's classic 1831 novel Pride and Prejudice, the haughty and proud Mr. Darcy starts out thinking that he's too high above Miss Elizabeth Bennet, but with time he comes to realize that she possesses the most admirable qualities of virtue, decency, honor, a clever wit, and an incredible intellect, and he eventually marries her. In All's Well That Ends Well, Count Bertram Rousillon starts out thinking that he's too high above the orphaned Helen de Narbonne, yet with time he comes to appreciate her virtue, decency, honor, and cleverness, and he eventually marries her. So let's take a look at the plot. Helen is the daughter of the recently deceased physician Gerard de Narbonne. Unfortunately, because she is a low-born domestic servant, she becomes the ward of the kindly French-Spanish Countess Rousillon, who thinks of Helen as a daughter. A ward is usually an orphaned adult placed under the protection of a legal guardian. She's in love with the Countess's son Bertram, but he's very indifferent toward her because he thinks she's beneath him. He leaves for Paris to replace his late father as an attendant to the ailing King of France. Helen longs to be near Bertram and decides to follow him under the pretext of offering the king her services as a healer since her late father left her his most effective remedies. The king is skeptical, but Helen stakes her life that her cure will restore the king's health, saying that if he dies, she agrees to be put to death. Fortunately, the king recovers and makes good on his promise to Helen that since she saved his life, she may choose a husband among any of his courtiers. The king assembles his court, and not surprisingly, Helen chooses Bertram. Unfortunately, he is shocked and repulsed because of her poverty and low status. Demonstrating his poor judgment of people, he rejects her, which offends and angers the king. Not wanting to go back on his promise, the king provides a dowry and forces Bertram to marry Helen. He reluctantly agrees to the marriage, but Bertram goes off to war in Italy right after the ceremony without even giving his brand new bride a goodbye kiss. Bertram takes along his friend Paralis, who is a weak, spineless, and disloyal friend. And even though Helen, the French Lord Lafeu, Countess Rousillon, her fool Lavache, and the two Lord Domains all realize that Paralis is a boastful coward, Bertram thinks well of him, demonstrating once again his poor judgment in people's characters. Bertram says that he will only consider Helen to be his wife if she can become pregnant with his child and get his family ring from him. Depressed and dejected, Helen decides to return to the Countess, who is now also her mother-in-law. The Countess is absolutely horrified at what her son has done and treats the virtuous, humble, and wronged Helen as her own child in Bertram's absence. Meanwhile, Bertram is fighting the wars in Italy along with the king's sons. At the same time, he becomes very attracted to the impoverished local noblewoman's virgin daughter Diana, who is aware that he doesn't care for his wife. The two Lord Domains are amazed that Bertram is so taken in by his cowardly friend Paralis that they urge Paralis to cross into enemy territory and fetch a drum which was lost in battle. While searching for the drum, a bunch of his comrades, posing as enemy soldiers, kidnap Paralis, blindfold him, and with Bertram in attendance, get him to betray his friends and to surrender a letter warning Diana about Bertram's lascivious nature. After missing her husband, Helen decides to follow Bertram to Italy. When she arrives, she befriends Diana and makes arrangements to trade places with her, whom Bertram is trying to take to bed. On Helen's advice, Diana gets Bertram's ring in exchange for her virginity. After Bertram reluctantly agrees to part with his ring, Diana trades his ring for one of Helen's. As a result of this bed trick, also known as the old switcheroo, Helen consummates their marriage and gains his ring without Bertram even realizing it. Even though Paralis knows that the jig is up, he's relieved just to be alive and decides to reinvent himself and seeks redemption by admitting his fall from grace to Lord Lafew, who agrees to assist him in his redemption. After Helen decides to fake her own death, Bertram thinks he's free of her and returns home to France. He tries to marry Lord Lafew's daughter, but Diana shows up and causes a ruckus in the king's court, claiming that she was seduced by Bertram. When Lafew hears about this report, he breaks off the engagement between his daughter and Bertram. Suddenly, Helen appears alive and well in the court. She explains how the rings were exchanged and announces that she's fulfilled her husband's challenge because she is carrying his child. Bertram is so impressed by everything that Helen did to win him that he promises to love her. Thus, the play concludes with the king delivering this epilogue. The king's a beggar, now the play is done. All is well ended, if this suit be won, that you express content, which we will pay, with strife to please you, day exceeding day. Ours be your patience then, and yours our parts. Your gentle hands lend us, and take our hearts. When we return, we'll look at some of the remarkable characters in All's Well That Ends Well. Many critics agree that All's Well That Ends Well is a problem play. Well, if that's true, the problem stems from flaws in two of the main characters. First, we have our heroine, Helen, who I've also seen referred to as Helena and Helena, but I'm not sure why. I decided to go with Helen, which is how she's listed in the Complete Works of William Shakespeare Oxford edition. Helen is the daughter of Dr. Gerard de Narbonne, a renowned physician who passed away 6 months earlier. As a result, Helen is an orphan and becomes the ward of the Countess of Roussillon, who thinks the world of Helen, even though Helen is comparatively low-born and works as a gentlewoman for the Countess. What we know about Helen is that she is young, fair, wise, humble, and good. In fact, most people would agree that she's too good for the Countess's good-for-nothing son, Bertram. Bertram's father has also recently died, and he's now become the ward of the King of France, whom his father had previously served. At the beginning of the play, the king is gravely ill and near death. Helen uses her late father's skills and medicines to save the king's life, and in exchange, he agrees to allow her to pick the husband of her choice. Naturally, she picks Bertram, who doesn't want to have anything to do with her, and he flat out refuses to marry her. It's only after he faces the king's wrath that he changes his tune, even though he's determined to pretend she doesn't exist. Most people hate Bertram because he decides against the king's will to go to Italy to fight in wars rather than act as a husband to Helen. Not only that, but along with his cowardly companion Paralis, he spends his time in Florence seducing virgins. The main problem in the play is that Helen loves Bertram, the audience hates Bertram, and even after Helen outsmarts him and he says he will be a true husband to her at the end of the play, we don't really believe him, and we still don't understand what she sees in him in the first place. But in doing some research, let me see if I can help you come to terms with this character. Bertram is about 21 years old when his father dies. Without any say in the decision, he is instantly ordered by the king to marry Helen, whom he already knows and has not developed any feelings for. Yes, she is too good for him, even though he thinks the opposite is true. And we see that he makes terrible and reprehensible decisions. But he's only 21 years old. Think about all the mistakes you made when you were 21 years old. Bertram is immature, self-centered, and like most 21-year-old men, obviously not ready for marriage. But I'm sure he'd like to think that when he is ready, he would have a say in picking his own spouse. Let's also remember that Helen is very wise and mature, but she doesn't really understand Bertram yet either. So let's give this couple the benefit of the doubt, because it's Helen's clever ingenuity and persistence that eventually helps Bertram realize what a great cat she really is. When Helen goes to Italy, she meets Diana and her widowed mother. These women band together to outsmart Bertram. And Paralis may be a foolish coward, but after he's found out, at least he becomes humble, penitent, and reforms his life, so let's give him some credit for admitting his shortcomings and reinventing himself. When we return, we'll look at some of the plot devices and memorable scenes from All's Well That Ends Well. One of the first plot devices we encounter in this play is an unusual bargain between the gravely ill King of France and Helen. She believes that her late father's medical remedies can cure the king, but he's very skeptical, and so the two strike up a bargain. Helen is willing to be put to death if she doesn't cure the king of his illness, and in exchange, he agrees to try her cure, and if he regains his health, she gets to pick her choice of husband from among the king's nobles. The king recovers and makes good on his promise. So far, so good. The problem is, Helen chooses Bertram, and Bertram doesn't want to marry Helen. Just like in Macbeth, The Merchant of Venice, Pericles, Prince of Tyre, and The Winter's Tale, All's Well That Ends Well includes one of the most intriguing and unusual riddles in any Shakespeare play. The reluctant husband Bertram Russillian writes a letter to Helen stating, "When thou canst get the ring upon my finger, which never shall come off, and show me a child begotten of thy body, that I am father to, then call me husband. But in such a then I write a never." And although the prospect seems grim, we know that if all's well to end well, Helen will find a way to overcome the dilemma. The next three plot devices go hand in hand with each other. They are the bed trick, the dead trick, and the ring trick. The bed trick involves Diane being willing to tell Bertram she will sleep with him in exchange for his family ring, and Helen taking her place and becoming pregnant by her lascivious husband without him even realizing it. The dead trick involves Helen spreading word that she is dead and Bertram falling for it. Fortunately, it's just a ruse in order to expose Bertram's scandalous behavior and allow Helen to accomplish both conditions of her husband's challenge. The ring trick involves getting Bertram's family ring, replacing it with the ring the king gave Helen, and giving it back to him in front of the entire court, thus demonstrating her cleverness and worthiness to be Bertram's wife. The last plot device we'll look at is the monumental wrap-up scene at the end of the play, in which all of the loose ends and confusion are cleared up. Hey, if it worked in the Comedy of Errors, The Two Gentlemen of Verona, Pericles, Prince of Tyre, Measure for Measure, Twelfth Night, and Much Ado About Nothing, that's good enough for me. And as far as memorable scenes go, let's take a look at three. First we have Act 4, Scene 2, in which Bertram is trying to convince Diana to sleep with him. She's been well prepared for his advances, and she plays him like a fiddle. She tells him that her virginity is the honor of her household, and that if he wants to take it from her, he'll have to first fork over his family ring, which has been passed down for many generations. In Act 4, Scene 3, we watch as the blindfolded Paralis is interrogated by his captors and betrays every secret he knows about Bertram, the two Lord Domains, and the strengths of the Duke's men. He can't give them up fast enough. In the same scene, he's told that he's about to be executed, and he asks that his blindfold be taken off so that he could see his own death. Once it's removed, he realizes that he's actually among the very men he's just slandered and betrayed. And finally, in Act 5, Scene 3, we have the massive wrap-up scene in which Bertram is exposed as a cad in front of the king and his entire court. Helen walks in, and to Bertram's shock and everyone else's delight, she finally wins him over. When we return, we'll look at some of the major themes that run through All's Well That Ends Well. Chastity and lechery are two prevalent themes battling one against the other in All's Well That Ends Well. From the opening scene in Act 1, we see Helen and Paralis debating both sides of whether or not she should keep or lose virginity. Helen's solitude is interrupted by the arrival of Paralis, and he begins with one of the worst icebreakers any man has ever tried on a woman. Paralis says, "Are you meditating on virginity?" A word to the wise: if you're trying to impress a woman, I recommend you say something that's more likely to generate a positive response, such as Dilbert cartoonist Scott Adams' ultimate pickup line, "Criticism completes me." Still, Helen is not offended by his question and plays along with him, saying, "Aye, you have some stain of honor in you. Let me ask you a question. Man is enemy to virginity. How may we barricado it against him?" Paralis says, "Keep him out." Helen says, "But he assails, and our virginity, though valiant in the defense, yet is weak. Unfold to us some warlike resistance." Paralis says, "There is none. Man, sitting down before you, will undermine you and blow you up." Helen retorts, "Bless our poor virginity from underminers and blowers up. Is there no military policy how virgins might blow up men?" Paralis, whose name means words, offers many on the subject. He continues, "Virginity being blown down, man will quicklier be blown up. Marry, in blowing him down again, with the breach yourselves made, you lose your city. It is not politic in the commonwealth of nature to preserve virginity. Loss of virginity is rational increase, and there was never virgin got till virginity was first lost. That you are made of is metal to make virgins. Virginity, by being once lost, may be 10 times found. By being ever kept, 'tis ever lost. 'Tis too cold a companion. Away with it." Helen answers, "I will stand for it a little, though therefore I die a virgin." Paralis concludes, "There's little can be said in it. 'Tis against the rule of nature. To speak on the part of virginity is to accuse your mothers, which is most infallible disobedience. He that hangs himself is a virgin. Virginity murders itself, and should be buried in highways out of all sanctified limit, as a desperate offense against nature. Virginity breeds mites, much like a cheese, consumes itself to the very paring, and so dies with feeding his own stomach. Besides, virginity is peevish, proud, idle, made of self-love, which is the most inhibited sin in the canon. Keep it not. You cannot choose but lose by it. Out with it. Within 10 years it will make itself 10, which is a goodly increase, and the principle itself not much the worse. Away with it." Later on in Act 4, Scene 2, we see Bertram negotiating with Diane to give up her virginity to him, and she agrees to do so, providing he's willing to part with his ring that has been handed down in his family for generations. It's only after much reluctance on both sides that the two come to terms with each other. But of course, the lusty Bertram loses his family ring, while Diana keeps her family honor, and Helen takes the ring by substituting herself in bed for Diana. Unfortunately, Bertram is not the only character in the play given to debauchery. While in the act of confessing everything he can possibly think of when he thinks he's been captured by the enemy and his life depends on turning over secrets to them, Paralis starts filling us in on the two Lord domains. Of the second one, he says he's a copy of the first, but of the first, he goes into great detail, stating, "He was whipped for getting the sheriff's fool with child, a dumb innocent that could not say him nay. He also says, for rapes and ravishes, he parallels Nessus. And while we can't believe everything Paralis says, we do know that what he divulges about Bertram's lechery is true, and so there's nothing to contradict his assaults on Lord Dumaine. One of the more striking themes that runs through All's Well That Ends Well is how some characters are very good at judging others and some of them are absolutely terrible at it. We see that Bertram initially misjudges Helen because she's poor and overlooks her wonderful qualities of cleverness, wisdom, decency, devotion, and sensibility. We can only hope that Bertram will become worthy of redemption when he accepts his role as Helen's husband, as he promises to do at the end of the play. Bertram also sees Paralis as a good and brave friend, even though he's nothing but a scoundrel, a liar, a false friend, and a coward, and he only learns the truth when the two Lord Dumaines show Bertram Paralis's interrogation. Helen appears to demonstrate poor character judgment by setting her heart on Bertram. She certainly doesn't know him very well, and indeed his behavior throughout most of the play is deplorable towards her and Diana. Helen is wise, and perhaps it's her good judgment of character that enables her to see Bertram's potential, and she's willing to wait for him to achieve his promise. Remember, at the end of Measure for Measure, Mariana says to the Duke, "They say best men are molded out of faults, and for the most become much more the better for being a little bad. So may my husband, and so may Bertram. So let's give Helen the benefit of the doubt that Bertram may become more worthy of her once he grows up, and with her guidance, better follows his father's example. After all, it's her life." Besides, it didn't take Helen long to size up the Countess, the King of France, Diana, or her widowed mother and win all of them over. She has excellent people skills and a way of bringing out the best in others. The Countess Roussillon also appears to be an excellent judge of character. Even though she loves her son, she's not blind to his shortcomings and makes no excuses for his bad behavior. She recognizes Lavatch as a scurvy sort of rascal whom her late husband took pity on and only uses him when she absolutely has to. But when it comes to Helen, we see her compassionate side, and unlike some overprotective mothers who think a poor, orphan peasant is not good enough for her son, she embraces Helen's goodness and takes her side over Bertram's. We don't see a lot of the widow Capulet of Florence, but we can tell she's a good judge of character and trusts Helen to have Diana's best interest in mind. We know that she sizes up Bertram accurately as well. Diana genuinely trusts Helen, but is assisted in this area by her mother's wise counsel. She's a bit naive, so their protective supervision of her comes in handy to keep her from becoming just another one of Bertram's conquests. The King of France is also a good judge of Helen and Lefew's characters, even though he's a little wary of their recommendations. He catches on to Bertram's lecherous shortcomings pretty quickly. He's very cautious about Diana at the beginning, but eventually he realizes that her evasiveness is just a ploy to help Helen fulfill Bertram's challenge, and the king rewards Diana handsomely with a large dower at the end. And Lord Lefew demonstrates good judgment in Helen by recommending her to the king. He's taken in initially by Bertram, but wisely withdraws his willingness to allow him to marry his daughter Maudlin. However, when it comes to Paralis, he was the first person who found him out, yet he didn't kick him when he was down, and instead Lefew invites him into his house and seems willing to help him further on his road to redemption. When we return, we'll look at some of the most powerful lines in All's Well That Ends Well. There may be some problems with the character flaws in this play, but there are no problems with the many spectacular and moving lines in All's Well That Ends Well. Let's first get acquainted with the Countess, who strives to give her son Bertram some sage advice before leaving to serve the King of France. In Act 1, Scene 1, she tells him, "Be thou blessed, Bertram, and succeed thy father in manners as in shape." Thy blood and virtue contend for empire in thee, and thy goodness share with thy birthright. Love all, trust a few, do wrong to none. Be able for thine enemy rather in power than use, and keep thy friend under thine own life's key. Be checked for silence, but never taxed for speech. What heaven more will, that thee may furnish, and my prayers plucked down fall on thy head. Farewell, my lord. There's something very endearing about a dear, sweet young woman expressing her unrequited love. Here is Helen again in Act 1, Scene 1, deifying Bertram and seeing him almost as great as the sun above her. Oh, were that all! I think not on my father, and these great tears grace his remembrance more than those I shed for him. What was he like? I have forgot him. My imagination carries no favor in it but Bertram's. I am undone. There is no living, none, if Bertram be away. 'Twere all one that I should love a bright particular star and think to wed it. He is so above me. In his bright radiance and collateral light must I be comforted, not in his fear. The ambition in my love thus plagues itself. The hind that would be mated by the lion must die for love. 'Twas pretty, though plague, to see him every hour, to sit and draw his arched brows, his hawking eye, his curls in our heart's table. Heart too capable of every line and trick of his sweet favor. But now he's gone, and my idolatrous fancy must sanctify his relics. A little later on in Act 1, Scene 1, Helen decides to take responsibility for her own success and strategizes on going to see Bertram under the guise of trying to cure the ailing King of France. She says, "Our remedies oft in ourselves do lie, which we ascribe to heaven. The fated sky gives us free scope, only doth backward pull our slow designs when we ourselves are dull. What power is it which mounts my love so high that makes me see and cannot feed mine eye? The mightiest space and fortune nature brings to join like likes and kiss like native things. Impossible be strange attempts to those that weigh their pains and sense, and do suppose what hath been cannot be. Whoever strove to show her merit that did miss her love. The king's disease, my project may deceive me, but my intents are fixed and will not leave me." But before Helen goes, the Countess confronts her and relentlessly asks her if she loves Bertram. Here's Helen in Act 1, Scene 3 saying, "Then I confess, here on my knee before high heaven and you, that before you and next unto high heaven, I love your son. My friends were poor but honest, so's my love. Be not offended, for it hurts not him that he is loved of me. I follow him not by any token of presumptuous suit, nor would I have him till I do deserve him, yet never know how that desert should be. I know I love in vain, strive against hope. Yet in this captious and untenable sieve, I still pour in the waters of my love, and lack not to lose still. Thus, Indian-like, religious in mine error, I adore the sun that looks upon his worshipper, but knows of him no more. My dearest madam, let not your hate encounter with my love for loving where you do. But if yourself, whose aged honor cites of virtuous youth, did ever in so true a flame of liking wish chastely and love dearly, that your Diane was both herself and love, oh, then give pity to her, whose state is such that cannot choose, but lend and give where she is sure to lose, that seeks not to find that her search implies, but riddle-like lives sweetly where she dies. And let's look at Diana in Act 4, Scene 2, who discovers that she was well advised by her mother about how phony Bertram's come-ons to her would be. My mother told me just how he would woo, as if she sat in his heart. She says all men have the like oaths. He had sworn to marry me when his wife's dead. Therefore, I'll lie with him when I am buried. Since Frenchmen are so braid, that means deceitful, marry that will, I live and die a maid. Only in this disguise I think it no sin to cozen him that would unjustly win. Fortunately, Diana had a good positive support base surrounding her, or she very likely might have fallen for Bertram's overtures. And finally, in Act 4, Scene 2, we see Paralis express his relief that he's still alive after thinking he was about to be executed by his enemies. And even though his friends all know him to be a coward and a liar, he plans to reinvent himself as a much more humble and decent man. Yet am I thankful. If my heart were great, 'twould burst at this. Captain, I'll be no more. But I will eat and drink and sleep as soft as captain shall. Simply the thing I am shall make me live. Who knows himself a braggart, let him fear this, for it will come to pass, that every braggart shall be found an ass. Rust sword, cool blushes, and Paralis lives safest in shame. Being fooled by foolery thrive, there's place and means for every man alive. Leave it to Shakespeare to find and point out the good even in a cowardly liar and fool. When we return, we'll look at some of the major turning points in All's Well That Ends Well and correlations to some of the other Shakespeare plays. I don't want to forget to tell you that upon completion of this series, there'll be an ebook published called Romeo and Shakespeare, which will be a companion piece to this series. As we take a look at three key turning points, we'll begin in Act 1, Scene 3, when Helen is forced to admit out loud to the Countess Vercillion that she is in love with her son Bertram. At first, she feels shame because of her low birth and fears she'll be thrown out onto the street. But instead, the Countess embraces Helen and recommends that she go to Paris where Bertram is attending the king in hopes of curing the ailing monarch. Now Helen has an ally and the means to accomplish her goal. Next, in Act 2, Scene 3, we see that the king has recovered from his illness and is up and dancing with joy. He allows Helen to select the husband of her choice, and naturally she picks Bertram. Not only that, but the king also agrees to provide Helen with honor and a sizable dower to remove Bertram's claims that she's beneath him. And finally, in Act 4, Scene 3, we watch as Diana gets Bertram to give up his family ring in exchange for her virginity. Diana gives the ring to Helen. Helen switches places with Diana and sleeps with her husband and becomes pregnant by him. Having both Bertram's ring and baby fulfills his obligation and earns Helen the right to call him her husband. Since this was the last Shakespeare play in the series, it seems only natural that there would be the most correlations to all of the other Shakespeare plays, and that certainly turned out to be the case. At the beginning of the play, Helen and Bertram are each mourning for their respective fathers, and the Countess is mourning the death of her husband. In Twelfth Night, both Viola and Olivia are mourning the death of their fathers and brothers. At the beginning of Hamlet, the title character is mourning for the loss of his father, and in Love's Labour's Lost, the Princess of France mourns the death of her father at the end of the play. In the opening scene, after Count Rousillion's death, Lord Lafeu tells the Countess and Bertram that they will find a husband and a father respectively in the King of France. This is similar to what Claudius says to Gertrude and Hamlet in Hamlet. Henry V also tells his brothers that he will be a father to them after the death of Henry IV. The Countess gives her son Bertram very sound advice as he leaves for Paris, just like Polonius does in Hamlet when his son Laertes leaves for France. Helen has been described as courageous as Isabel, as imaginative as Rosalind, as patient as Virgilia, as modest as Hero, as ingenious as Portia and Viola, as sensible as Sylvia, as dedicated as Imogen, and as passionate as Juliet. The Countess loves Helen and cares for her after her father's death and encourages Helen's feelings for her son. In Hamlet, Queen Gertrude also encourages Ophelia and hopes that she might someday become Hamlet's wife. In Othello, Brabantio loves Othello until he elopes with Desdemona, and in Cymbeline, the king loves Posthumus and raises him until he secretly marries his daughter Imogen. The Countess is very supportive and protective of her daughter-in-law Helen, even more so than Volumnia is of her daughter-in-law Virgilia in Coriolanus. There's also a close bond amongst the Duchess of York, Queen Elizabeth Grey, and even Lady Anne in Richard III. In Act 2, Scene 1, the ailing king mistrusts innocent Helen's attempts to restore him from his fistula. In Pericles, Prince of Tyre, Pericles mistrusts his innocent daughter Marina, who tries to restore him from his melancholy. In Act 2, Scene 2, LeFou says, "I am Cressid's uncle that dare leave two together when he brings Helen in to cure the King of France." This is a reference to Pandarus, Cressida's uncle, who acts as a clandestine go-between for the two title characters in Troilus and Cressida. Bertram must marry Helen because she picks him as part of the deal she made when she saved the king's life. In A Midsummer Night's Dream, Helena must marry her father Aegeus's choice of husband Demetrius or die according to an ancient Athenian rite. In The Merchant of Venice, Portia must marry whoever selects the correct chest according to her father's will, and in The Two Noble Kinsmen, Emilia must marry whoever wins a match for her, and the loser must die. Lavache the clown amuses the Countess Racilian by demonstrating that he can remain non-committal to any question by simply uttering the exclamation, "Oh, Lord, sir." In Twelfth Night, Feste the Jester amuses Olivia by proving her a fool because she's mourning for her brother's soul, who she believes to be in heaven. Lavache also says that he wants to marry Isabel because he's driven by the flesh. This is similar to Touchstone wanting to marry Audrey in As You Like It because man has his desires. In Act 2, Scene 5, LeFou calls out the coward Parolles just like the Lord Chief Justice does of Falstaff in Henry IV, Part 2. In Act 2, Scene 5, Parolles says he knows not how he offended LeFou, just as Oswald says to Cornwall about Kent in King Lear. Helen goes to Paris to follow Bertram, the man she loves. Hermia goes into the Athenian woods to follow Demetrius in A Midsummer Night's Dream. Julia goes into the forest to follow Proteus, and Sylvia goes into the same forest to follow Valentine in The Two Gentlemen of Verona. Portia goes to the Venice court to follow Bassiano, her husband, in The Merchant of Venice, and Imogen goes to Milford Haven to meet her husband Posthumus in Cymbeline. In Act 4, Scene 5, Lavache says that he serves the Black Prince, meaning the Prince of Darkness, or Satan. However, in Edward III, Edward's son Ned is known as the Black Prince. He also becomes Richard II's father. Lord LeFou calls out the braggart Parolles, knowing him to be a fool, just like Friar Lodovick, a.k.a. Duke Vincenzio, does to Lucio in Measure for Measure. Helen goes as a pilgrim bound for religious sanctuary at the shrine of Saint Jacques le Grand. In Measure for Measure, Isabel is a novice of the Order of St. Clare. In Pericles, Prince of Tyre, Thaisa becomes a votress of the Temple of Diana in Ephesus, and in The Comedy of Errors, Emilia becomes the abbess of the Ephesian Priory. Diana, her mother, and Mariana all join with Helen to thwart the bad Bertram's exploits. This is like Mariana and Isabel thwarting Lord Angelo in Measure for Measure, Mistress Quickly, Mistress Ford, and Mistress Page thwarting Falstaff in The Merry Wives of Windsor, and the Duchess of York and Queen Elizabeth standing up to the evil Richard III. Diana's last name is Capulet and is descended from that house, which is also Juliet's last name in Romeo and Juliet. Also, in Twelfth Night, Sir Andrew Aguecheek had a grey horse named Capulet. Diana, her mother, Mariana, and Helen all watched soldiers returning on parade from a window above, just like Pandarus and Cressida do in Troilus and Cressida. Parolles shows himself to be a fraud, liar, and coward in front of his friends, like Falstaff does in Henry IV Parts 1 and 2, in front of Ned Poins and Prince Hal, and also in The Merry Wives of Windsor in front of virtually the entire company. Also, when Parolles is slandering his friends who are listening in, they can hardly restrain themselves from striking him. This is similar to Sir Toby Belch watching Malvolio talk about him behind his back in Twelfth Night. When Bertram discovers that Parolles is a phony, he says, "A plague on him." In Twelfth Night, Sir Toby Belch says, "A plague of these pickle herring." And in Romeo and Juliet, the dying Mercutio says, "A plague of both your houses." In Act 4, Scene 3, Parolles says that Captain Dumaine got the sheriff's fool with child, a dumb innocent that couldn't say him nay. This is like Lancelot Gobbo in The Merchant of Venice with the Moor, Lucio in Measure for Measure with Kate Keepdown, supposedly Archite in The Two Noble Kinsmen with the Lord Stewart's daughter, and with Don Armado in Love's Labour's Lost with Jacquinetta. Parolles shows himself to be a false friend to Bertram, like Falstaff does to Hal in Henry IV Part 2, like Sir Toby Belch does to Sir Andrew Aguecheek in Twelfth Night, like Proteus does to Valentine in The Two Gentlemen of Verona, like Iago does to Othello, Michael Cassio, and Rodrigo in Othello, like Enobarbus does to Mark Antony in Antony and Cleopatra, and like Rosencrantz and Guildenstern do to Hamlet. When Parolles is revealed as a fraud, he vows to live a better life, as does Cardinal Wolsey in Henry VIII, but unlike Pistol at the end of Henry V, who says he'll revert back to his cut-purse ways. Bertram is given a second chance to wed Lefue's daughter Magdalen after Helen is believed dead, but eventually ends up married to Helen. In Much Ado About Nothing, Claudio is given a second chance to wed Hero's cousin after Hero is believed dead, but eventually ends up married to Hero. The king questions Diana about Helen's ring, just like Cymbeline questions Iachimo about Inogen's bracelet. The king also gets angry with Diana for being evasive about the bed trick, just like Aeschylus does with Mariana in Measure for Measure. Diana is accused of being a strumpet, but that's false. In Much Ado About Nothing, Hero is accused of being a common stale, but that's false too. In Measure for Measure, Mariana is accused of being unchaste, but we know that that's also false. At the end of the play, Helen, who is believed to be dead, miraculously appears alive, just like Thaisa in Pericles, Prince of Tyre, Amelia in The Comedy of Errors, Hermione in The Winter's Tale, Hero in Much Ado About Nothing, Ned in Edward III, and Claudio in Measure for Measure. There are also some biblical correlations in All's Well That Ends Well. The prideful Captain Parolles bears many similarities to the prodigal son, and although he returns to Lord Lefue instead of to his own father, he does so humbly and penitently, and Lefue takes pity on him and helps him to redeem himself. In Act 4, Scene 5, Lavache tells Lefue, "I am for the house with the narrow gate, which I take to be too little for pomp to enter. Some that humble themselves may, but many will be too chill and tender, and they'll be for the flowery way that leads to the broad gate and the great fire." This is a direct correlation to St. Matthew chapter 7, verses 13 and 14, which reads, "Enter ye at the narrow gate, for wide is the gate, and broad is the way that leadeth to destruction, and many there are who go in thereat. How narrow is the gate, and strait is the way that leads to life, and few there are that find it." And finally, there's also a biblical story in Genesis chapter 38 about Judah, the father of Onan, who was killed for spilling his seed. unbeknownst to Judah, after his wife's death, he sleeps with his dead son's widow and impregnates her. In exchange, he gives her a ring, a bracelet, and a staff. 3 months later, Judah is told that his daughter-in-law Thamar had become a prostitute and is with child. But just before she's about to be burned, she sends to Judah saying, "By the man to whom these things belong, I am with child. See whose ring and bracelet and staff this is." And her life was spared. So there you have it. I hope I didn't miss too many correlations, but it just goes to show that the deeper you look at Shakespeare's work, the more new tidbits you'll discover. When we return, we'll look at some of the remarkable actors in the 1981 BBC Shakespeare version of All's Well That Ends Well. Before we look at some interesting facts about All's Well That Ends Well, I want to make sure that I leave you with some valuable resources and reference tools for you to pursue your love of Shakespeare even further. First, I highly recommend the second edition of the Oxford Shakespeare, The Complete Works, unless a newer version is released. It contains every known work that Shakespeare ever wrote or contributed to, including his plays, sonnets, and long poems. I first developed my love of Shakespeare by reading Tales from Shakespeare by Charles and Mary Lamb, which was written in the early 1800s. It contains very abbreviated versions of 20 of Shakespeare's plays, recounted by the authors in their own words. It's an excellent introduction for anyone that you'd like to see develop an appreciation for William Shakespeare's plays. There are some incredible online resources, especially on YouTube. First and foremost, I encourage you to watch Tim Nance of Nance Notes and Narwhals, who has done exceptionally entertaining and educational videos on all of Shakespeare's plays, sonnets, and poetry, in addition to many other literary masterpieces by other writers. You'll also find some full-length lectures by Harvard professor Marjorie Garber, whose excellent 2004 book, Shakespeare After All, points out an enormous number of correlations among Shakespeare's plays and biblical references, not to mention the translated meanings of many of Shakespeare characters' names. The late Professor Paul Cantor, formerly of the University of Virginia, also has an outstanding lecture series on Shakespeare and politics. And if you want to hear how the women's monologues are supposed to sound, be sure to find the insane artist, also known as Octavia Selina Alexandrou's magnificent performances. If you don't own a copy of Shakespeare's plays, you can find them online through the Folger Shakespeare Library, where you can read along with the entire text. And if you're still confused with some of the meanings, try using litcharts.com, where you can compare the actual text to the side-by-side modern translations of Shakespeare's plays. And now, as promised, here are some interesting facts about All's Well That Ends Well. The play is based on the tale of Giletta di Narbona, Tale 9 of Day 3, from the Decameron, which was written by the 14th century writer Giovanni Boccaccio, which Shakespeare may have read when it was translated into French by the 15th century author William Painter in his work entitled Palace of Pleasure. All's Well That Ends Well is one of Shakespeare's lesser-known works and has been criticized because Bertram switches his feelings about Helen from hatred to love in just one line at the end of the play. Some critics even think it's possible that there may have been some missing lines at the end of the play, but that's only speculation. Still, if it is a problem play, the only real problem is that it reflects real life very closely. Our heroine's name is Helen in the Oxford Shakespeare Complete Works, but she also goes by Helena and Helena. This was probably to help with the flow of the text. The actual Parolles was Charles, the Duke of Aumale, a cousin of the Dumains, who was hanged, drawn, and quartered in effigy and died in Flanders. These facts were included in Christopher Marlowe's work, The Massacre in Paris, and further demonstrate Shakespeare's incredible knowledge and attention to detail. By the way, Parolles' name means words in French, which is ironic because he tells the second Lord Dumain, "I love not many words." Bertram says that he was told that Diana's name was Fontabelle, which means beautiful fountain, whereas Diana is well known as the goddess of virginity, among other names. If we were to make a list of Shakespeare's bad boyfriends, most people would probably put Bertram at the top of the list for defiling virgins and telling them his wife is dead. But he would have to also beat out Proteus in The Two Gentlemen of Verona, Lord Angelo and Lucio, both in Measure for Measure, Chiron and Demetrius in Titus Andronicus, Demetrius in A Midsummer Night's Dream, Claudio in Much Ado About Nothing, Hamlet, and Mark Antony. In the play, Helen says that she's going to St. Jacques le Grand, also known as St. James the Greater, which is located in Santiago de Compostela, Spain. However, her going from France through Florence to get there would defy geography. It's kind of like Fortinbras and Hamlet cutting through Denmark in order to get from Norway to Poland. Also, even though Roussillon is an old province in France located at the very southern border and is separated from Spain by the Pyrenees Mountains, this town predates Shakespeare and was under Spanish rule up until 1641. However, there is another Roussillon located on the banks of the Rhone River, which was a standard stop and staging post on the route from France to Italy and is most likely where Bertram is from. The King of France mentions that the Florentines are fighting the Savoys. These were people from the Republic of Siena, a town in Italy which was at war with the state of Florence and was defeated in 1559. Irish playwright George Bernard Shaw commented on the Countess of Roussillon, stating that her character was the most beautiful old woman's part ever written. And although it doesn't have anything to do specifically with All's Well That Ends Well, I didn't want to conclude this series without mentioning that Pope Adrian IV, the only English pope who reigned from 1154 to 1159, was originally named Nicholas Breakspere. When we return, we'll look at some of the remarkable actors in the 1981 BBC Shakespeare version of All's Well That Ends Well. Before we look at some of the actors in the 1981 BBC Shakespeare version of All's Well That Ends Well, I want to give credit to the director, Elijah Moshinsky, for his incredible camera work, especially in the scene where Paralis realizes that he's been made the butt of a prank, and in the wrap-up scene in which the camera captures the faces of all in attendance as they discover that Helen is still alive. Also, Stephen Oliver's hauntingly beautiful refrain that plays throughout the entire play is arguably the finest piece of music in the entire series. The reason I harp on the BBC Shakespeare DVD series so much, even though it was recorded over 40 years ago, is because of the superior acting, the completeness of the series, only Edward III and the two noble kinsmen are absent, and its dedication to the original text. While there are many other versions of Shakespeare plays, I've been disappointed with most of them when they decide to take liberties with the original material specifically to improve, or more often, co-opt them for their own social or political agendas. I also want to thank Crystal Grove for providing the voice of Helen at the beginning of this episode, and Kevin Hallman of Hallman Media for providing all of the additional voices, British accents, and special effects needed to produce this video series. And now to the actors. Ian Charleson, who plays Bertram, also played Fortinbras in Hamlet in 1980, and Octavius Caesar in Antony and Cleopatra in 1981. Cecilia Johnson, who plays the Countess Roussillon, also played the nurse in Romeo and Juliet in 1978. Pippa Gard, who plays Diana, also played Marina in The Tempest in 1980, and Hermia in A Midsummer Night's Dream in 1981. Notably, in all three plays, the actress was charged with guarding her virginity, modesty, and honor against the advances of unwanted aggressors. Kevin Stoney, who plays Ronaldo, also played Aeschylus in Measure for Measure in 1979. Rosemary Leach, who plays the widow Capulet of Venice, also played Emilia in Othello in 1981. Max Arthur, who plays the second gentleman, also played Lucilius in Timon of Athens in 1981. Robert Lindsay, who plays Captain Dumaine, also played Fabian in Twelfth Night in 1980. Lysander in A Midsummer Night's Dream in 1981. Iachimo in Cymbeline in 1982. And Benedict in Much Ado About Nothing in 1984. Also in 1984, he starred in a revival of Me and My Girl opposite Emma Thompson, earning him a Tony Award, and in 2021, Lindsay starred as Moonface Martin in a revival of Anything Goes, in which he was reunited with Felicity Kendall, his 1980 Twelfth Night co-star, after 41 years. Terence McGinty, who plays the First Gentleman, also played Lucianus in Hamlet in 1980, Servilius in Timon of Athens, and the Second Gentleman in Othello, both in 1981, and the British Captain in Cymbeline in 1982. He also plays Thomas Mowbray in the 2003 version of Richard II with Mark Rylance. Angela Downs, who plays Helen, also played Mrs. Cole in the 1996 Gwyneth Paltrow version of Emma. James Simmons, who plays a bachelor, also played Sir Andrew Aguecheek in the 1988 Kenneth Branagh version of Twelfth Night, and Duke Edward of York in the 1989 Kenneth Branagh version of Henry V. And finally, the magnificent actor Michael Hordern, who plays LeFou, played Capulet in Romeo and Juliet in 1978, Prospero in The Tempest in 1980, King Lear in King Lear, and Jupiter in Cymbeline, both in 1982. And before that, he played Senex in the 1966 film A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum with Zero Mostel and Michael Crawford, and Baptista in the 1967 Elizabeth Taylor Richard Burton version of The Taming of the Shrew. Now, stay tuned for today's trivia challenge, which is called Title Characters. All right, and now it's time for today's trivia challenge, which is called Title Characters. Identify the Shakespeare play by these title characters whose names don't appear in the titles. Number 1, Valentine and Proteus. Number 2, Alice Ford and Margaret or Meg Page. And number 3, Archite and Palamon. When we get back, I'll give you the answers, and we'll wrap up with some relevant lessons from All's Well That Ends Well. Okay, let's see how you did on today's trivia challenge called Title Characters. You are to identify the Shakespeare plays by these title characters whose names don't appear in the titles. Number 1, Valentine and Proteus. They are the two gentlemen of Verona. Number 2, Alice Ford and Margaret or Meg Page. They are the Merry Wives of Windsor. And number 3, Archite and Palamon. They are the two noble kinsmen. Now, let's wrap up with some relevant lessons from All's Well That Ends Well. First, be persistent. Success is a little like wrestling a gorilla. You don't rest when you get tired. You rest when the gorilla gets tired. Second, when looking for love, make sure that you're evaluating your spouse against the right qualities, such as virtue, decency, intelligence, selflessness, and trustworthiness. And finally, be patient and persevere. Anything worth having is worth waiting for. Remember that in the confrontation between the rock and the stream always wins. Not with strength, but with persistence. And I want to say thank you to my wonderful 88-year-old Aunt Norma for being my greatest encourager and inspiration for this series. I'm Dave Romeo, and thank you for watching the series finale episode of Romeo and Shakespeare. I truly hope you found these episodes as entertaining to watch as they were to make. Of course, one of the best things about Shakespeare's plays is that you can watch them over and over again and always learn something new. And so I hope you'll enjoy re-watching these episodes as well. So with that in mind, please join me next time in episode 1, when a Roman world leader flocks to Egypt for fun.